Commander Vexler stood on the bridge of his warship, the Eternal Silence. His 4 eyes studied the battle map that floated in the air before him. The holographic display showed his fleet of 200 ships forming a perfect crescent around the human colony world called New Hope. "Status report," Vexler said. His voice was calm. He had done this many times before. "All ships in position, Commander," said his tactical officer, a young Korath named Drelmaz. "The humans have deployed 43 vessels to defend the colony. Our victory is certain." Vexler clicked his mandibles in agreement. The Korath had conquered 17 species across the galaxy. Each conquest followed the same pattern. They studied their enemy, they learned their tactics, they developed counters to every possible strategy, then they attacked with overwhelming force. The humans would be no different. "Begin the assault," Vexler ordered. "Use formation Delta 7. It has proven effective against defensive positions in 94% of simulated battles." The Korath fleet moved forward like a wave of silver death. Their ships were arranged in a precise geometric pattern that their war computers had determined was optimal. Each vessel knew its role. Each captain understood the plan. On the human flagship, the INS Defiant, Admiral Sarah Chen watched the approaching enemy on her own display. She was a small woman with gray hair cut short. Her uniform was wrinkled. She had been awake for 30 hours. "They're using a standard encirclement formation," said Commander Marcus Webb, her tactical officer. "Classic Korath approach. They'll try to pin us against the planet's gravity well." Admiral Chen nodded slowly. She had read the intelligence reports about the Korath. They were excellent warriors. Their technology was advanced. Their tactics were refined over thousands of years of conquest. But they had never fought humans before. "Signal all ships," Chen said. "Prepare for Operation Crazy Ivan." Webb blinked. "Ma'am, I don't think we have an operation by that name in our tactical database." "We don't," Chen replied with a thin smile. "I just made it up. Tell Captain Rodriguez to take the destroyer group and punch straight through their center line, full speed, no evasive maneuvers." That's suicide, Admiral. The center of their formation has the most firepower." "Exactly, they won't expect it." Webb hesitated for only a moment, then he began relaying the orders. This was why humans had survived so long in a hostile galaxy. They did things that made no sense. On the Eternal Silence, Drelmaz suddenly straightened at his station. "Commander, the human destroyers are breaking formation. They appear to be charging directly at our center." Vexler's mandibles clicked in confusion. "That is incorrect. Run a diagnostic on your sensors." "Sensors are functioning properly, Commander. The humans are definitely attacking our strongest position." "That makes no tactical sense. No species would deliberately engage a superior force at its point of greatest strength. They must be attempting some form of deception." Vexler studied the display. His war computer was running calculations trying to determine what the humans were really planning. There had to be a hidden objective, a feint, a trap. But the human destroyers just kept coming. They accelerated to full combat speed and dove straight into the heart of the Korath formation. The first Korath ships opened fire. Their plasma cannons lit up the void with streams of green death. The human destroyers took hits. Shields flared, armor melted. One destroyer exploded in a ball of orange flame. But the rest kept coming. They punched through the Korath line like a fist through paper. Behind them, they left chaos. Korath ships had to cease fire to avoid hitting each other. The perfect geometric formation began to break apart. "They actually did it," Vexler whispered. "They actually attacked our center." "Commander, our formation is compromised. The human destroyers are now behind our main line. They are attacking our support vessels." Vexler's 4 eyes widened. The support vessels carried their ammunition and repair drones. If they were destroyed, the battle would become much more difficult. "Reconfigure to pattern Omega-3, Vexler ordered. "We must protect the support ships." The Korath fleet began to reform. It was a complex maneuver, but the Korath had practiced it many times. Within minutes, they would have a new formation that protected their vulnerable rear while still maintaining pressure on the human main fleet. Admiral Chen watched the enemy ships begin to move. "They're adapting," she said. "Good, Marcus, signal the Defiant and the cruiser group. We're going to do something stupid." Webb looked at her, more stupid than what we just did. Much more stupid, we're going to run away. Run away. Full retreat, make it look panicked. I want the Korath to think we're broken. The order went out, the human cruisers and the flagship began to pull back. Their formation dissolved into apparent chaos. Ships scattered in different directions, seemingly fleeing for their lives. On the eternal silence, Drelmas reported the development with barely contained excitement. Commander, the humans are retreating. Their formation has collapsed. We have achieved victory. Vexler was not so certain. Something felt wrong. The humans had been fighting well. Why would they suddenly break and run? Pursue with caution, Vexler ordered. Maintain formation discipline. But his words came too late. Several Korath captains, eager for glory, had already broken formation to chase the fleeing humans. Their ships spread out across a wide area as they hunted the seemingly helpless enemy vessels. That was when Admiral Chen sprang her trap. Now, she said quietly. The fleeing human ships stopped running. They turned and began to fight back. But more importantly, the destroyer group that had punched through the Korath center had used the confusion to circle around. They now attacked the scattered Korath pursuers from behind. The Korath ships found themselves caught between two forces. Worse, they were spread out and could not support each other. What had seemed like an easy pursuit became a desperate fight for survival. Impossible, Vexler breathed. The war computer gave no prediction of this tactic. It is not in any database. No species has ever used such a maneuver. What are your orders, Commander? Drelmas asked. His voice was no longer calm. Vexler hesitated. For the first time in his long career, he did not know what to do. The humans were not fighting according to any known pattern. They were inventing their tactics as they went. And he had no idea what they would do next. The battle raged for 3 more hours. Admiral Chen threw everything she had at the Korath. She used tactics that had never been tried before. She combined maneuvers in ways that made no logical sense. She took risks that no sane commander would consider. And it worked. When the smoke cleared, 47 Korath ships had been destroyed. Another 60 were badly damaged. The survivors retreated to the edge of the system, regrouping around the eternal silence. The humans had lost 19 ships. It was a heavy price, but they had won. On the defiant, Admiral Chen sat in her command chair. She was exhausted. Her hands were shaking from too much coffee and too little sleep. Damage report, she said. We've taken significant losses, Webb replied, but the colony is safe. The Korath are withdrawing. Chen nodded. She had expected the enemy to retreat. They needed time to understand what had happened. Time to analyze the battle and develop countertactics. But that was the thing about humans. By the time the Korath figured out how to counter today's tactics, the humans would have invented entirely new ones. The war was far from over. The Korath controlled a vast empire. They had thousands of ships and billions of soldiers. This battle was just the beginning. But for the first time, the galaxy's greatest conquerors had met an enemy they could not predict. An enemy that did not follow the rules. And that terrified them more than anything. Commander Vexler stood on his damaged bridge, staring at the battle reports. His fleet had been mauled by a force less than a quarter its size. His perfect tactics had failed. He needed to understand what had gone wrong. Drelmas, he said slowly, compile all sensor data from the battle, every human maneuver, every tactic they used. I want our war computers to analyze it all. Yes, Commander, but what are we looking for? Vexler's mandibles clicked in frustration. A pattern, there must be a pattern, some underlying logic to their madness. No species fights randomly. The humans must have a system, a doctrine, something we can learn to predict. But deep in his heart, Vexler feared the truth. What if the humans had no system? What if they truly made up their tactics in the moment, responding to situations with pure creativity and instinct? How could you fight an enemy like that? How could you prepare for tactics that did not exist until the battle began? The answer, Vexler realized with growing dread, was that you could not. And that made humanity the most dangerous species the Korath had ever faced. 3 weeks after the Battle of New Hope, the Korath High Command gathered in their war chamber on the homeworld. 12 commanders sat around a circular table, their 4 eyes fixed on the holographic display in the center. Vexler stood before them, presenting his report. The humans used no fewer than 14 distinct tactical maneuvers during the engagement, he explained. Of these, only 3 have any parallel in known military doctrine. The remaining 11 appear to be entirely original. Original? The question came from Supreme Commander Tharzan, the oldest and most experienced warrior in the room. You are saying the humans invented 11 new tactics during a single battle? Yes, Supreme Commander, that is exactly what I am saying. Silence filled the chamber. The Korath had been conquering other species for 20,000 years. In all that time, they had encountered countless enemies with countless strategies. They had built a database of military tactics containing over 8 million entries. But the humans were adding to that database faster than anyone had thought possible. This is troubling, Tharzan said finally. Our strength has always been our ability to predict and counter enemy tactics. If the humans are truly inventing new approaches during battle, our traditional methods will not work. Perhaps we should simply overwhelm them with numbers, suggested Commander Kralvek. Send 1,000 ships instead of 200. They cannot invent tactics fast enough to counter such force. Vexler shook his head. I considered that approach, but the humans have already demonstrated they can be unpredictable with inferior numbers. With more ships, they would have more options, more ways to surprise us. We might lose even more vessels. Then what do you suggest? Tharzan asked. Vexler hesitated. What he was about to say went against everything the Korath believed about warfare, but he saw no other option. We must learn to be unpredictable ourselves, he said. We must stop relying on pre-planned formations and calculated responses. We must teach our commanders to improvise. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. Improvisation was not the Korath way. It was messy, inefficient, chaotic. But it might be the only way to fight the humans. Very well, Tharzan said after a long pause. You will lead this initiative, Vexler. Train a new generation of commanders. Teach them to think like humans. And when you are ready, you will face the humans again. Vexler bowed his head in acceptance. He had been given an impossible task, teaching the Korath to abandon thousands of years of military tradition. But he would try, because if he failed, the Korath Empire itself might fall. Admiral Chen received word of the Korath withdrawal through her intelligence network. The enemy was pulling back to their core territories. They were not defeated, but they were scared. Good. She sat in her quarters on the Defiant, reading reports and drinking cold coffee. The human fleet was battered but intact. Repairs were underway. Reinforcements were coming from Earth and the other colonies. A knock came at her door. Enter, she called. Commander Webb stepped inside. He looked tired, but there was a spark of excitement in his eyes. Admiral, we've received a message from Earth. The United Nations wants to speak with you. Chen sighed. Politicians, they always wanted to talk after the fighting was done. Patch it through. The screen on her desk flickered to life, showing the face of Secretary General Antonio Reyes. He was a heavy man with kind eyes and a politician's smile. Admiral Chen, he said warmly, on behalf of humanity, I want to thank you for your victory at New Hope. You saved 8 million lives. We lost 19 ships and over 3,000 sailors, Chen replied. I'm not sure that counts as a victory. It does when you consider what you were facing, 200 enemy vessels against 43 of ours. The analysts said we had a 12% chance of success. You proved them wrong. Chen leaned back in her chair. The analysts don't understand how humans fight. They try to calculate odds based on ship numbers and firepower. But war isn't about numbers, it's about creativity, adaptability, the willingness to try something crazy because nothing else will work. Reyes nodded slowly. That's actually why I'm calling. We've been studying the Korath for months. We know they're superior to us in almost every measurable way. More ships, better technology, thousands of years of military experience. But Chen prompted. But they have a weakness. They can't handle surprises. Their entire military doctrine is built around prediction and control. When something unexpected happens, they freeze. They don't know how to react. I noticed that in the battle, Chen said. Every time we did something unusual, there was a delay before they responded, like they were waiting for their computers to tell them what to do. Exactly, the Korath have been conquering the galaxy by being smarter than everyone else, but you can't outsmart someone who makes up the rules as they go. Jen allowed herself a small smile. So what's the plan? We keep doing what you did at New Hope. We stay unpredictable. We try things that no sane military would attempt. We make the Korath so confused and frustrated that they don't know which way is up. That's a dangerous strategy, Chen warned. Being unpredictable means taking risks. We'll lose ships, we'll lose people. I know, but it's the only way we can win. A conventional war against the Korath Empire would end in our extinction. We have to fight unconventionally. We have to be human. Chen thought about that for a moment. Being human. It sounded simple, but it was actually the most complex thing in the universe. Humans were messy, they were illogical. They made decisions based on emotion and instinct as much as reason. They did things that made no sense, and somehow those things worked out. Maybe that was their greatest weapon. All right, she said finally, I'll keep being unpredictable, but you need to give me the resources to do it. More ships, more people, and most importantly, commanders who aren't afraid to think outside the box. You'll have everything you need, Reyes promised. Just keep winning, keep proving that humanity can survive. The communication ended. Chen sat alone in her quarters, staring at the blank screen. The war was just beginning. The Korath would come back. They would come back stronger and smarter and more prepared. But they would never be prepared for humans. Because humans didn't know what they were going to do until they did it. They invented their tactics in the heat of battle, driven by desperation and creativity and sheer stubbornness. It was chaotic, it was dangerous, it was utterly, wonderfully human. And it might just save them all. 6 months passed, the Korath rebuilt their fleets and licked their wounds. Commander Vexler worked tirelessly to train his new commanders in the art of improvisation. It was not going well. The Korath mind simply did not work like a human mind. They could not grasp the concept of making decisions without complete information. They could not accept the idea of taking risks without calculated odds of success. One young commander, after weeks of training, had broken down completely. How can I decide without data? He had screamed. How can I act without a plan? It is madness. Vexler had to admit he understood the frustration. He had spent his entire life learning to think logically and systematically. Abandoning that approach felt like cutting off one of his own limbs. But he had watched the humans at New Hope. He had seen how they fought, and he knew that unless the Korath changed, they would lose. The problem was that change came slowly to an ancient species. The Korath had been doing things the same way for 20,000 years. They could not simply abandon their traditions overnight. Meanwhile, the humans were getting stronger. Intelligence reports showed that Earth was building new ships at an alarming rate. They were recruiting soldiers from every colony. They were training new commanders using methods that the Korath could not even comprehend. And most disturbing of all, they were inventing new weapons, new technologies, new ways of fighting. The humans, it seemed, could not stop innovating. Every day brought new ideas, new approaches, new complications for the Korath war planners. Vexler received a message from Supreme Commander Tharzan. The High Command had decided to launch a second offensive. This time, they would use everything they had, 1,000 ships against the human core worlds. The attack would begin in 1 month. Vexler read the message 3 times, 1,000 ships. It was the largest fleet the Korath had ever assembled. Surely such overwhelming force would be enough to crush the humans. But deep in his heart, Vexler was not so sure. The humans had proven they could do the impossible. They had shown that numbers and technology were not the only factors in war. Spirit mattered, creativity mattered, the willingness to try something crazy mattered. And no one was crazier than the humans. Vexler began preparing for the assault. He studied every scrap of information about human tactics. He ran simulation after simulation on the war computers. He tried to predict what the humans would do. But he knew it was useless. The humans would not do what he predicted. They would do something new, something unexpected, something that would make his careful plans worthless. That was the terrible truth about fighting humanity. You could not prepare for an enemy that made up the rules as they went along. You could only hope to survive. Admiral Chen received word of the approaching Korath fleet through her spy network. 1,000 ships, the largest enemy force ever assembled. She gathered her commanders in the war room of the Defiant. There were 20 of them now, each leading a squadron of Earth's growing fleet. Together, they commanded a force of just over 200 ships. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chen said, looking around the room, "the Korath are coming with everything they have, 1,000 ships against our 200. Traditional military wisdom says we should retreat, preserve our forces, fight a guerrilla campaign." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But we're not going to do that. We're going to fight, and we're going to win." Captain James Rodriguez, commander of the destroyer squadron, raised an eyebrow. "With all due respect, Admiral, how exactly are we going to beat a force 5 times our size?" Chen smiled. It was the smile of someone who had already thought of something brilliant and terrible. "We're going to cheat," she said. "We're going to use every dirty trick, every crazy idea, every impossible scheme we can think of. We're going to fight like humans." She activated the holographic display, showing the projected path of the Korath fleet. "They're coming straight for Earth. They're not trying to be subtle anymore. This is an all-or-nothing assault designed to crush us completely." "Which means they're predictable," Commander Webb observed. "We know exactly where they'll be." "Exactly, and that gives us options." Chen began outlining her plan. It was complex. It was risky. It involved using asteroids as weapons, hiding ships inside the wreckage of old battles, creating fake distress signals, and a dozen other tricks. By the time she finished, the commanders were staring at her with a mixture of awe and terror. "That's insane," Rodriguez said finally. "Half of those tactics have never been tested. We don't even know if they'll work." "That's the point," Chen replied. "Neither do the Korath. Every single thing we do will be something they've never seen before. They won't know how to respond, and in the time it takes them to figure it out, we'll hit them with something else." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each commander. "I won't lie to you, this will be the hardest fight of our lives. We're going to lose ships, we're going to lose friends, but if we don't stop the Korath here, there won't be anywhere left to run." The room was silent for a long moment, then Captain Rodriguez stood up. "I'm in," he said simply. "Let's show these aliens what humans can do." One by one, the other commanders voiced their agreement. The plan was crazy, the odds were terrible. But they were human, and being human meant never giving up, no matter how hopeless things seemed. The battle for Earth was about to begin. The Korath fleet arrived in the Sol system exactly on schedule. Commander Vexler stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Void Hammer, watching the sensor displays. "All ships have completed transition," Drelmas reported. "Fleet integrity is 100%. The humans have deployed their defensive fleet near the third planet." Vexler studied the display, 200 human ships against his 1,000. The odds were overwhelmingly in his favor. But he did not feel confident. "Deploy according to standard formation Alpha 1, he ordered, "but instruct all commanders to remain alert for unusual enemy movements. The humans will not fight conventionally." The Korath fleet spread out into a massive formation designed to envelope and destroy the human defenders. It was the same basic approach they had used for thousands of years, refined to perfection. But this time, Vexler had added contingencies, multiple backup plans, instructions for dealing with unexpected situations. He had learned from his mistakes at New Hope. He would not be surprised again. The fleet moved forward. The human ships remained in position, waiting. And then the first trap was sprung. A massive explosion ripped through the Korath formation. 3 ships vanished in balls of fire. "What was that?" Vexler demanded. "Unknown, Commander, our sensors show nothing. No missiles, no energy weapons, just explosions." Another blast, 2 more ships destroyed. Mines, Vexler realized. They seeded the approach with stealth mines. It was such a simple tactic, such an obvious one really, but no species had ever used mines against the Korath before. Their sensors were supposed to detect all known explosive devices. The humans must have invented something new, something their sensors could not see. All ships halt advance, deploy mine-clearing protocols. The fleet stopped, ships began sweeping the area ahead with specialized beams designed to detonate hidden explosives. But while they were focused on the mines, Admiral Chen made her move. Now she said quietly. 100 human ships that had been hiding among the asteroids of the system's outer belt suddenly activated their engines. They came screaming in from an unexpected direction, hitting the flank of the Korath formation. At the same time, the defensive fleet near Earth broke into multiple groups. Each group attacked a different section of the Korath line. They hit fast and pulled back, never staying still long enough to be targeted. And hidden among the wreckage of old space battles throughout the system, small human fighters launched surprise attacks on Korath support ships. It was chaos, beautiful, terrible human chaos. Vexler tried to respond. He issued orders, he shifted ships, he attempted to restore order to his formation. But every time he adapted to one threat, the humans changed tactics. They would retreat from one area and attack another. They would pretend to be damaged, then strike when enemy ships came close. They would use communication jamming to isolate Korath squadrons, then destroy them piecemeal. And worst of all, they did things that made no sense whatsoever. One human destroyer deliberately rammed a Korath cruiser, destroying both ships. The sacrifice bought time for other human vessels to escape, but no Korath commander would ever consider such an exchange. A human carrier launched its fighters, then self-destructed in the middle of a Korath formation. The resulting explosion disabled 3 enemy ships, which were then finished off by the fighters. A group of human ships created a fake distress signal, drawing Korath rescuers into an ambush. It went on and on. Every minute brought new surprises, new tactics, new nightmares. Commander Drelmaz said, his voice trembling, "We have lost 112 ships, the humans have lost 47. Vexler stared at the display in disbelief. His fleet still outnumbered the humans, but he was losing ships at an alarming rate, and his commanders were becoming increasingly paralyzed by the unpredictable attacks. "This is not possible," he whispered. "No enemy should be able to fight like this." But the humans could, because they were not fighting according to any plan. They were making it up as they went, responding to opportunities and creating chaos wherever they could. The Korath had spent 20,000 years learning to fight wars of calculation and precision. The humans were teaching them that sometimes madness won. The battle raged for 18 hours. Admiral Chen remained on the bridge the entire time, directing her forces with calm precision even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. The Korath were adapting. Slowly, painfully, they were learning to respond to human tactics. But for every adaptation they made, Chen introduced something new. When they developed countermeasures for the stealth mines, she ordered her ships to use the debris of destroyed vessels as improvised missiles. When they learned to anticipate flanking attacks, she had her ships pretend to flank, then attack from the exact direction the Korath expected. When they began to identify which human ships were damaged and which were faking, she had perfectly functional ships actually damage themselves to maintain the deception. It was exhausting, it was terrifying, it was wonderful. Admiral Webb said quietly, "The enemy flagship is moving to the rear of their formation. I think their commander is considering retreat." Chen looked at the display. The Korath fleet had been reduced by almost half. Her own forces had taken terrible losses too, but the humans were winning. "Signal all ships," she said. "Prepare for Operation Final Curtain." Webb nodded. This was the last gambit, the most insane plan they had developed. "All ships," Chen broadcast on an open channel that she knew the Korath would intercept. "Begin immediate retreat, fall back to the secondary defensive line at Mars." The human fleet began to withdraw. Ships that had been fighting furiously moments before suddenly turned and ran. On the Voidhammer, Vexler watched the retreat with suspicion. "They're running. Why are they running? They were winning." "Perhaps they have exhausted their tricks," Drelmaz suggested hopefully. Vexler's mandibles clicked in disagreement. The humans always had more tricks. That was the problem with fighting them. "It's a trap," he said. "Order the fleet to hold position. Do not pursue." But his order came too late. Several Korath commanders, frustrated by hours of confusion and embarrassment, had already begun chasing the fleeing humans. They smelled victory and wanted to taste it. "Recall those ships immediately," Vexler shouted. The pursuing Korath vessels closed in on the retreating humans. They entered weapons range and prepared to fire. And then every single human ship that had been retreating fired their engines in reverse. They stopped running and turned to fight. But that wasn't the trap. The trap was the planet behind them. Chen had positioned her fleet so that the pursuing Korath ships were now between her forces and Mars. The red planet's tiny moons, Phobos and Deimos, had been rigged with massive amounts of explosives. Detonate, Chen ordered. Both moons exploded simultaneously. The debris scattered outward in all directions, filling space with millions of chunks of rock and metal. The pursuing Korath ships found themselves in the middle of a deadly storm. Their shields could stop weapons fire, but they were not designed to handle thousands of physical impacts at once. 23 Korath vessels were destroyed in seconds. The rest were badly damaged, their shields depleted and their hulls breached. Chen's fleet swooped in to finish them off. They destroyed moons, Vexler breathed. They weaponized celestial bodies. It was unprecedented, it was insane, it was pure, distilled humanity. And it broke the back of the Korath assault. The remaining enemy ships began to retreat, not in an organized withdrawal but in a panicked flight. Ships fled in all directions, desperate to escape the humans who had proven to be more dangerous than any enemy the Korath had ever faced. Vexler watched his fleet crumble, 400 ships destroyed, 300 more damaged beyond combat effectiveness. Only 300 remained capable of fighting and their crews were terrified. Against an enemy that had started with 200 ships and now had perhaps 80 remaining. The humans had won. Signal retreat, Vexler ordered, his voice hollow. All ships returned to Korath space. The Void Hammer turned and fled along with the remnants of the fleet. Behind them, the humans did not pursue. They had won their victory and would take time to recover. But Vexler knew this was not the end. The High Command would demand another attack. They would build more ships, train more soldiers, develop new tactics. And the humans would be waiting with new surprises, new impossible strategies, new ways to shatter Korath's certainty. How do you fight an enemy that makes up the rules as they go along? Vexler finally knew the answer. You don't. 1 year later, the war ended, not with a final battle, but with a negotiation. The Korath High Command had tried 3 more offensives, each one defeated by human tactics that no one could have predicted. They had lost nearly half their fleet. Their economy was straining under the burden of constant warfare. And their commanders were having nervous breakdowns. The psychological toll of fighting humans had proven to be the most devastating weapon of all. Korath officers who had spent their careers relying on prediction and calculation found themselves paralyzed by an enemy that defied all logic. Some refused to take command of ships assigned to fight humans. Others became so obsessed with anticipating human tactics that they could not make any decisions at all. A few simply went mad. Supreme Commander Tharzan called for peace. Admiral Chen met with him on a neutral space station in unclaimed territory. She was accompanied by Secretary General Reyes and a small diplomatic team. Tharzan looked old, his 4 eyes had lost their sparkle, his mandibles hung slack. We wish to end this conflict, he said. The Korath Empire will recognize human territory. We will not attack your worlds again. What changed your mind? Chen asked. Tharzan was silent for a long moment, then he spoke. For 20,000 years, the Korath conquered the galaxy through superior planning and prediction. We analyzed our enemies, we learned their patterns, we developed counters to every possible tactic. He looked directly at Chen. But we cannot predict you, we cannot understand how you fight. Every battle brings tactics that have never existed before. Every engagement introduces chaos that our commanders cannot handle. We call it improvisation, Chen said. We call it madness, Tharzan replied, but it works and we cannot match it. Our minds do not function that way. We need order, we need patterns, we need to know what will happen next. And we need to not know, Chen said. That's what makes us creative. We don't plan everything in advance because we can't, so we adapt, we improvise, we make it up as we go along. Tharzan nodded slowly. It is a strange way to exist, uncertain, chaotic, but it has made you formidable. It's made us human. The peace treaty was signed that day. The Korath Empire and the human territories would coexist in peace. Trade would be established. Cultural exchanges would begin. And perhaps over time, the Korath might learn a little bit about improvisation, about creativity, about the value of not knowing what comes next. But probably not. Some things were uniquely human. After the signing ceremony, Admiral Chen stood alone at a window overlooking space. The stars stretched out before her, billions of points of light in the darkness. "Quite a view," said a voice behind her. She turned to see Commander Vexler approaching. He had been part of the Korath diplomatic delegation. "It is," she agreed, "though I've seen it from warship bridges more often than I'd like." Vexler stood beside her, his 4 eyes fixed on the stars. "I have studied human history," he said. "Your species has been at war with itself for most of your existence. You have developed countless ways to kill each other. Each generation invents new weapons, new tactics, new horrors." "That's true," Chen admitted. "We're not proud of it. But it also explains why you are so dangerous. You have been practicing war for thousands of years. Each conflict taught you new lessons. Each battle made you more creative." Chen considered this. "I suppose that's one way to look at it. We've certainly had plenty of practice at improvising." "The Korath have been conquerors for 20,000 years, Vexler said, "but our wars were always controlled, calculated. We knew we would win before we began fighting." "That must have been nice." "It was, but it made us complacent. We stopped learning, we stopped adapting. We assumed our methods were perfect because they always worked." He turned to look at Chen directly. "And then we met humans, and you showed us that perfection is not the same as effectiveness, that chaos can defeat order, that madness can overcome calculation." "We didn't do it to teach you a lesson," Chen said. "We did it to survive." "I know, that makes it even more impressive. You were not trying to be creative, you were simply being human." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars. "What will you do now?" Chen asked. "Return to my people, try to explain what I have learned, but I doubt they will understand. The Korath mind is not built for improvisation. Maybe the next generation will be different." Vexler's mandibles clicked in what might have been a laugh, perhaps, but it will take a very long time. Change comes slowly to ancient species. "Then we'll be patient. We've waited a long time to meet other intelligent life in the universe. A few more centuries won't hurt." Vexler turned to leave, then paused. "Admiral Chen, I must ask you something. During the Battle of Earth, when you destroyed the moons of Mars, was that part of your plan from the beginning?" Chen smiled. "No, I made it up about 4 hours before we did it." 4 hours? You invented a tactic that would change the course of the war, and you only thought of it 4 hours before you used it. That's how humans work. We see an opportunity and we take it. We don't always know if it will work, we just try. Vexler shook his head in wonder. Remarkable, terrifying, but remarkable. "Thank you, I think." The Korath commander departed. Chen remained at the window, watching the stars. The war was over. Humanity had survived. They had faced the greatest military power in the galaxy and won, not through superior technology or numbers, but through sheer creative chaos. It was a good feeling. But Chen knew it wasn't really over. There would be other threats, other enemies, other challenges that no one could predict. And when they came, humanity would face them the same way they always had. By making it up as they went along. By being creative, by being stubborn, by being unpredictable. By being human. And that, she realized, was the greatest weapon of all. Not ships or guns or tactics. Just the simple, beautiful, chaotic ability to look at an impossible situation and say, let's try something crazy. Because sometimes crazy was exactly what you needed. The stars twinkled in the darkness, full of mysteries and dangers and possibilities. Admiral Sarah Chen smiled and went back to work. There was always something new to invent.